Hi, my name is Jennifer Winland, and today I wanted to meet with you regarding the types of measurement units that can be used in CSS. And so in CSS, it allows you to define the size of properties or elements. This could be your font size, your padding, your margin, your border width, and your line spacing, your width and height in general, for maybe some of your copy that you're going to put on there in the general area you're going to define for it, the images such as your logo. Typically, you're going to write it out as the number followed by the unit without any white space. So you're going to say 10 pixels or 2 EM or 150%. So the types of measurements units that are available, they can be divided into two basic groups, your absolute and your relative. So we're all very familiar with absolute units. These are our inches, centimeters, millimeters, pixels, and point size. Picas I haven't really seen as much. So a point size is typically kind of what you use in Word and Excel, where you use the drop down and you say, oh, I want to make this 12 or 24. Those are point sizes. And I've seen pixels used most often by like our designers at work. They'll use pixels a lot to define size on the different print materials they put together. And really a pixel is just really the number of dots on a screen. So generally one dot is 1 pixel, though it can, if you have a high resolution device, 1 pixel can actually represent multiple dots. So if you were to write the font out using CSS, it would be, I'm doing this for my header 1, and my font size is 64px or 64 pixels. So when you do that, this is how it would display on the screen, and when it got smaller, this is what it looked like. And so this is one of the downsides to using an absolute unit of measurement, is that they don't scale between different types of devices, and so how it renders, what it looks like, and the user experience can just be drastically different. So this would be great in a desktop or a large tablet, but as you get to smaller and smaller devices, you basically lose all the other content because your headline is taking up the entire page and they're not seeing anything else. Whereas a relative unit is it changes size relative to something else. So a percent, it's going to be a percent of the total page or a percent of the area. An EM is relative to that of the element that is being used. So what is the default font size for that particular element? And that is what it's going to be. And then REM is the other one that I've seen used quite a bit, and that is relative to the size of the root element, which is basically, if you recall, your HTML tag that you do at the beginning and end of your document. That's your root element. And so whatever the default size for that is what the REM is going to be in reference to. The nice thing about this is that it scales better between different types of devices. And so every device has what is considered its default font. And so EM and REM, they're all going to start with whatever the default font is for that particular device, and then they do something with it from there. So in the case of this CSS, it's taking the default font and multiplying it by 3. Most devices today use 16 points about to be their default size. And so there's a lot of other ones on here too. I'm not going to go through all of them. The ones that I've really seen used would be the EM, the REM, and the percent. So these are new terms for me, and I'm looking at this going, well, I see the definitions, but what really does is the difference between an EM and REM. And so it really comes down to that EM is relative to the current element and what that default size for that current element is, while REM is relative to the default size of the root element. And so to kind of show you the point I want to make here, I took this from my assignment portal page, and I basically have an unordered list. And so I have a header 2, I have an unordered list, and then I have an unordered list nested inside the overall unordered list. And so I'm going to use style it using both EM and REM, and I want to point out the difference between the two. So this first one here on the left, this is using 0.8 EM or 80% EM, so 80% of my default size. And so this is what the page looked like. I didn't really have a lot of CSS coding around it other than this font size, and so this is just the default that my browser came up with. And so this was a header 2. This is all then just default size. So this is just straight default font, and then this is 80% of that default. But what I want to show you is what happened when I have an unordered list nestled inside of an unordered list. It basically took 80% of the default and then 80% of that. And if this went to a third level, it would be 80% of this one. And you could very quickly have something so small and unusable, which is where REM becomes in handy, because instead of being 80% of whatever element it's in reference to, it's 80% of the root. And so even though I've got the same nested ordered list or unordered list, it didn't change size. It's still smaller than the overall default font. It's 80% of that, but it maintained that steady 80% instead of doing 80% of 80%, which is what we had happen over here on the left. And so that was just one thing that I found to keep in mind, that when you are using the relative sizing of EM versus REM, that's really just how it handles these circumstances is the biggest difference between the two of them. And so with that, that is all that I had. So any questions you have for me about using the different units of measurement, or any experience that you've had and things that have worked or maybe not worked well, feel free to share with the rest of us on the discussion board. Thanks.